All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Today we are joined by Margaret Pettis and Nancy Takacs to talk about Margaret's books, Backroads of Utah and In the Temple of the Stars, and Nancy's book, Dearest Water. Margaret Pettis is the author of In the Temple of the Stars, a collection of poetry, a series of 5 novels of outdoor suspense, beginning with The Turquoise Bear, and Backroads of Utah, published in November 2021. Settling in Utah after working for the U.S. Forest Service as a wilderness ranger with a string of pack mules in the Sawtooth Wilderness of central Idaho, Margaret co-founded the Utah Wilderness Association and the High Uintas Preservation Council with her husband, Dick Carter. A career high school English teacher, she has taught writing to state prisoners housed in the Cache County Jail and art workshops for Audubon wilderness groups and Navajo children. She is an avid kayaker. Nancy Takacs' poetry awards include the Juniper Prize, the 2018 and 2016 15 Bites Book Award for Poetry, Weber's Sherwin W. H. Howard Award, a 2020 Pushcart Prize, and a runner-up for the Missouri Review Editors Prize. She is the author of 3 other books of poetry and 4 chapbooks. Nancy lives most of the year in the high desert town of Wellington, Utah, and spends time in Bayfield, Wisconsin, near the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, in a small cabin with her husband, poet Jan Minish. Their son, Ian Minish, is a photographer in Salt Lake City. Nancy is the inaugural Poet Laureate of Utah's art hub, Helper City. And before I turn the time over to the two of them, I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple of the upcoming events at our bookstore. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., we have our breakfast club meeting at Neomore Cafe, which is the coffee shop just across the way from our first floor entrance in Trolley Square. And we just get together to chat and have snacks. And our next one will be Tuesday, March 8th. And then the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, we host our virtual Lit Knit via Zoom. That's at 6 p.m. It's open to crafters of any kind, and if you'd like to attend, you can email Catherine with a C at wellerbookworks.com for the Zoom link. And our next one is on the 9th. We'll be ending tonight's discussion with a 10 to 15 minute audience Q&A. So if you have questions for Nancy or Margaret, leave them in the YouTube chat box and I'll make sure they get asked. And finally, if you enjoy this conversation, please consider supporting Nancy and Margaret by buying their books. And please consider supporting our bookstore by buying them through us. And I'll leave links where you can do so down below. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Nancy and Margaret. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Salem.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be on this program because it seems like as long as I have lived in Utah, Weller's Bookstore has just been the hub of, if you need it, you can get it at Weller's. And just, I mean, from the old days of Sam and Lila, just forever. I can't imagine Utah without Weller's Bookstore.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm going to start off asking Margaret some questions about her book, Backroads of Utah. And it is a coffee table book, beautifully done, with gorgeous illustrations that Margaret did herself. And when I got my hands on this book, Margaret, I couldn't put it down. I think I read the whole thing through in a couple of hours, and then I use it as a guidebook now because I want to see those little places that you mentioned, which are just really special places in Utah. I mean, you hit all of the little pockets of Utah's places. You don't talk about the big, national parks and all that stuff. And so that's why I find it so unique and so useful as well. My husband and I, Jan and I went last Saturday with your book in hand, and we drove up through Duchesne to Bluebell. And I've never been to Bluebell before. I've lived in Utah for 40 years. And it was just so fun going through all those little towns and then eventually hitting Roosevelt, and which led us to a little countertop diner. I don't know if you're familiar with that little diner in Roosevelt called Marion's. It's on Main Street, and they
I've
have
seen it.
two booths and like millions of things that they're selling, all hung all over the walls, and and several stools, and you can still get a sandwich for $3.50. So we were excited about that, and so we started with your book, and that's what I imagine a lot of people will be doing. I mean, you're writing. It seems like you wrote this book not just for people who are outside of Utah, but people in Utah who may have not seen, observed as carefully as you have, because you've gone to these places, it seems like, a number of times in order to be able to write so well about them. And for those of you who don't know, because you haven't seen the book, it's the sketches are just fabulous. The black and white sketches that you did of animals and petroglyphs and buildings, little buildings. How did this happen for you? I wondered when did this start?
The chicken or the egg, I guess, is the question. I always travel with drawing materials, and having the goal of knowing that this trip was going to be dedicated to the artwork, I had the pleasure of not having a big destination. I was really just enjoying picking the fruit along the way, essentially. And I could find places that I really had passed by quickly before en route to someplace else. But this time I got to stop at all the little places in between. And like you said, you just discover that little diner, or inside the little building, you find some local products that people have made and are selling, and or beautiful woodwork inside an old building that you just drive past.
Mm-hmm.
I became more and more embarrassed, I think, as I found more and more places. How did I miss that? Why did I not look at that before? What was I in such a hurry doing that I could not stop there before? And I marked a few pages in here just to show, like, I don't know if these are even going to show up, but I'll try to put them on the screen, and just to show some of the types of drawings that are done. And they were wonderful to be able to do, because they're very much memories of mine. Like this fellow. It was the postmaster, the water master, the bishop. He had like 5 different titles that he told me proudly about each one. And I asked him if I could draw his sheep wagon, and he took me on a tour inside it, and I met all of the cats. I don't know if you can see the little cat down at the bottom by his feet. And it just became, you'd sit down, start drawing. This one is called Mugwumps. And I hope people do appreciate it the way that you did, Nancy, that you maybe use the pictures as an additional draw to appreciate what was in something you're passing through, or quickly refer to the book.
Well, I love this one too. Can you see that? I love the turtle.
Yes.
Tell us how the turtle came into that one.
Well, the Desert Tortoise, actually. And if you go to Snow Canyon, you can, if you're lucky, see a desert tortoise on your way out to the rocks.
Have you seen them one there?
I have seen one. I've been lucky to see one. I didn't get to sketch the one that I saw, because he was, believe it or not, too fast for me. And he was under the brush. So maybe I'll show you. I use these particular tools. Like, this is a piece of bamboo that I'll dip in ink on my hair provides a great backdrop for a black thing, the tip.
Yes, it does.
Dip it in and I can draw more diluted lines or even like a stick of some kind. Sometimes it gives an interesting little point dipped into the ink and draw that way. Or then this is a Prisma micron pen. These are the usual pens that I draw with a very, very tiny tip. And then paintbrushes.
How interesting. Yeah.
Just explore.
Yeah, we wish we could see you in action using those tools. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Well, it was a very wonderful book to be able to draw. I've wanted to do it since I was in my 20s. The author, Earl Tholender, has an entire series of books called The Backroads of California, Oregon, Washington. They're full color in his drawings. And I fortunately contacted him years and years ago and said, would you be doing a Backroads of Utah book? And he said, I'm too old. I've done every state. I love your state, but I can't. Too late. And I said, would you be insulted if I did it? And he said, oh, I would be just honored if you would do it. And so with a blessing like that, who could not move forward and do it? So I've wanted to do it for a long time.
Good. Well, yeah. And have you, how did you decide? Because I love the little historic tidbits that you sprinkle throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
How was it a task to, I guess, choose the right tidbits that you wanted to include? I mean, did you have a whole lot of them? And then, did the book come together and you had to leave some aside for your next book on Backroads of Utah?
I think my next book might be The Backroads of Nevada. Because it's never been done. And Nevada has its own characteristics, we could say. So to answer your question, though, I'll choose something down in your area, say Huntington Canyon. I went down Huntington Canyon, pulled off, discovered that mammoth bones had been unearthed there in 1988. There's a little kiosk that documents it. So I wanted to learn more. So I went to the what was called College of Eastern Utah, and I met a paleontologist there, and I was able to hold a bone that came from a mammoth. And so a story just starts weaving from a discovery into more facts. And then I went home and read more about it and had the illustrations done to illustrate what I learned. I didn't want to give you too much because you could probably, as a reader, you can read in great depth about any of these topics, but this is a very broad book.
Yeah, it is. I like the way you have it organized with the maps, the hand-drawn maps, and the roads and all the towns that you have at the beginning of each geographical area, and then how your adventures into these areas, and it's very personal. That's why I liked it too. It's very personal, but not too personal, so that you don't go into great detail about what you love about the place, but you might offer something that's characteristic of the place.
Right. I didn't want the book to be about me. I wanted the book to be about a traveler moving through and some samples of what you might discover there. And I tried to cut it short of that. It didn't, because it doesn't matter what my conversation was with somebody. It's just enough that a little girl saw me drawing and I offered her a pen. And so we sat and we drew side by side in the Escalante, petrified wood we could draw together. And she had an experience then. That's something perhaps I wish I would have had happen to me, that I had found an artist and she had given me her pen and her sketchbook and let me draw and have the fun of doing that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's wonderful. I like that story. Well, you want to say anything else about the book before we segue into In the Temple of the Stars? Is there anything you'd like to tell us?
I think you did just a beautiful job of describing why someone would want to own the book. It's whether you want to have it on your own table at home and you can look at it all through the cold, icy winter and decide where you might want to venture out or discover some places near your own home, because we've been stuck in lockdown for 2 years. You can find the beauties nearby. And also the book, really, I mean it to be an attention to preserving old places. And it's amazing the number of places that I have drawn and visited. And just in a course of a couple of years, those structures are not there anymore. Or an old sheep wagon has been moved off because a new foundation of a house has been put in that spot. And certainly I could go on forever about wild places and how those are changing and disappearing. And but it's a statement to the beauty that is in Utah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love it. It would be a great gift, for any type of celebration, holiday. I plan to buy more to give to my friends, and so that
good.
I can have one.
Well, Weller's is selling them, so stop in at Weller's.
Yes, I certainly will, or give them a call and buy some that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great book. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's talk a little bit about In the Temple of the Stars, which came out around the same time. Wait, was it published around the same time, Margaret?
A year earlier. This was the first, this was October 2020 that the poetry book came out.
You have been busy.
Yes, I used that time to focus, finally.
It's amazing that you use that time to focus, because I hear from a lot of writers that they just felt like they were a deer in headlights during that time, and they couldn't write, they couldn't focus, they just didn't know what to do, and so they played video games, which is all right, that's fine, but it's good that you had that focus in order to finish up some of these works that you said that you've been working on for quite a while. But I mean, everyday life distracts us.
Yes.
Friends, parties, and cookouts and so forth distract us, because we enjoy them so much, and so it's hard to get back to. But you did during COVID, so congratulations on doing that too.
One thing I really discovered during the first year of COVID, since I'm personally not putting an end on COVID yet, I don't believe it, but the first year of COVID, I got a kayak, and I had never been a kayaker before. And so I joked that my life became isolated within isolation. I was going out completely by myself on a river, completely alone. But my eyes were so absorbing what was around me that just saved me completely. So that's
nice to know.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Well, now in your poems, in your poetry book, you mentioned before that, how important the natural world is to you, and how you feel at home in the natural world. And that, for me, it was so evident in your book that you are not afraid. Many of us going out by ourselves would be a little nervous. And your poems are so wonderfully at home in the natural world. And of course, your experiences are personal in this book of poetry. And I see a lot of connection between you and animals on your forays into the backcountry, because you write about the backcountry quite a bit in this book. And I just wondered, because we all have different stories, where did your love of nature and animals come from? How did that start for you?
I think because I've always had a horse, and I grew up on a farm. It was 160 acres of plum trees. So I lived in a massive orchard surrounded by other farms in the northern Sacramento Valley, near north of Sacramento, of course. And I was always on my horse, and I could explore, leave the straight lines of the trees and go over the levees, because we had levees protecting us from the flooding rivers around. And I'd go down to the Feather River, and it was hard to get to the Feather River. You had to take a machete, which my parents did not know that I had taken out of a shed on the ranch, and packed it in a gunny sack and took it with me, and got off the horse and had to chop my way through to get down, make a path down to the river, and then would hone it every time I would travel down there. But just something about being by a river felt very powerful, to not know where it came from around the bend, and swimming with my horse, which again was an illegal thing to do in my parents' minds, of letting my horse go into the river and swimming across, and I'd take her tail and go to the other side. And the other side was the other side, in quotes, of what is over there. Just, I think I've always been an explorer and wanted to discover that. So wild animals and whatever I would see was fantastic.
Yeah. First, your horse that you connected with, and horses are so sensitive anyway, and to have that close connection with an animal, and then an animal that takes you places, it sounds like.
Yes.
So
Right.
that you can just, you it's like how a kid feels like when they first get to ride a bike or get their driver's license. You found a sense of freedom. I was wondering, that's a lovely story. How did you decide on the title for the book? If you don't want to answer that, that's okay.
Well, without sounding religious, I love the word temple. I think it's a beautiful word. And a temple of stars is just a fantastic image to me. And so many times I've been camped in trees looking up, and the stars are up there with the walls of the tree trunks. And that is the temple of all my experience, or whatever spirit I might feel. And it just overrides everything.
Okay. Well, yeah, temple is a sacred place. And it's a place of spirituality. There are many different kinds of temples all over the world. And but you're talking about a natural temple. And I just love that. Would you read a poem that's your favorite before I ask you to read a couple of my favorites?
Sure. Okay. I just happen to have the book, right? Thanks, Nancy. Well, I was talking about kayaking, so maybe I'll read a kayaking poem, because it's one of the more recent ones that I've written. It's called Distance. It's on page 41 if you have the book right there. In this kayak, the color of riverbank bleached cottonwood. I paddle close, dripping, blending into the water world. Popping onto the surface from a black and white bubble, a red-eyed loon inspects my shape, my gestures, my route. Intolerant of uncertainty, he curls beneath the lake. I am a brooch on the water god's chest, lifting and lowering on each green swell. I sit the waves like the spine of a cantering horse, hammering toward shore. I paddle, propel my glide at my speed to my spot in my arm's rhythm. A naiad with an entourage of minnows, I beach my boat in the shallows, step barefooted onto the sand. Beneath driftwood, a spring trickles into the lake. Birds from dappled leaves flit down to sip their reflections. Adorned in shadows of cottonwood, I wade into stories of the lake.
And beautiful. I love that brooch on the water god's chest, is it? Yeah, I love that. That's
just
a great
felt like that rising and falling. And interestingly, in some years when the water has been so low, I have ridden a horse along the very depressed water level of Hiram Lake. And when the ground is hard enough and we don't sink in. So I've been able to circle the whole lake, which you can't do on a normal year. And I almost got the sensation of vertigo this last summer. For a weird reason, I was paddling along in my kayak in a place where I had ridden on the bottom on my horse. So I imagined almost myself on my horse below me in my boat. And that gave me kind of a roll in the stomach. It was having been in that same place in two different elements of air and water. It's probably more than you wanted to know, but those kinds of things happen in poetry, as you know.
Well, I mean, in your poems, I find you have, we talked about spiritual connection to nature and animals before. And in many of your poems, you have such a strong sense of wonder and praise for being out by yourself, being out alone, and being surrounded by natural elements or animals that you know are there. They're someplace out there, and it gives you such a feeling of humility. And that's what I love too about these poems, is that there's a feeling of you're small, and the natural world is so large and unpredictable and exciting, and there you create a tension in your poems that it's so lovely to read and to see where you're going to take us too, because most of us haven't been to those places. And I remember when I wrote a blurb for your book, I thought, this is the kind of book that you want to, take to before you go to sleep at night and read some of these poems about your adventures and your wonder. I mean, it's very naturally warm. Your poetry is very naturally warm. And so
thank you.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And that feeling, I remember you have a line in your poem, or you have, it's a title actually, A Stitch in the Star Field. Is that a title, or is that a line that I'm picking out?
It's both.
It's both. Okay. And so that feeling of smallness, you're just a stitch in the small field. What a great way to say that. I just love that.
I think we can stand some humility in, rather than taking the usual human forcing our way through everything and dominating it, I have this just infinite respect for the sacredness, the quiet, the others, not me. I am not the important one here. I'm passing through,
Right.
and I want their world to be celebrated.
Yeah, it's obviously that both in the back roads of Utah and in this book, you want to offer the reader a gift. Like you said, you're in the background, you feel as if you're sometimes even intruding. And I think of the poem Quick the Ground, which is a lovely poem about your walking with the dog through a wheat field. And here you are, you're being, all of us know what it's like. Well, those of us who have been in a big area where there's millions of grasshoppers, and you're trying not to step on them and crush them, and they're hurting you at the same time because they're trying to get out of your way. And so that really resonated with me. You say, I steal against the clacking at my ankles. And yet in the poem, you're worried that you and your retriever are crushing them and killing them. And so I wanted to ask you about that feeling of intrusion, and also the ending where you say, lips tight, your lips are tight as you leave, as you exit the field. And then you end with that line about how you hope that they're eating the ones, you try to avoid killing any of them. But
Right.
So could you talk just a minute about that one?
I think, again, it has to do with just because I don't find them pleasant doesn't mean they don't have a right to be doing what they do. And this poem, interestingly, was something that I wrote for my 9th grade students. I wanted them to make use of verbs. And so there are many, many verbs in this poem, of a woman and a dog and everything that is moving around them. And I just came up with the grasshopper image, of which was a true story, and that would really work. So that's where all of those verbs fit into the poem. But I love the fact that I don't even know that they are aware of me. They're just bing, they're up in the air and they blast off and they bounce off me. And it could have been I could have been a stem as well as a human, or a deer, or a fence post, whatever happens to be out there.
In the last poem that I wanted to ask you about is Night Flight. I feel that's an especially moving poem for the reader, and wondered if you would just read this poem for us.
Okay.
Give us just a little background after, and then it looks like it's 12:30.
Right. We need to, I want to ask you about some poems. Should we finish this one and then let's move forward?
Okay. Sounds good.
Trying to find a page. Oh, here we go. So it's called Night Flight. Between constellations, I watch for her tiny silver plane, fleck of Cessna, steel in a black sea of stars, the pulsing bright beacons of scarlet-tipped primaries. Tell me, bird woman, on this, your first night flight, how high are the stars? Where does the true sky begin? What shelters your plane in heaven? What pulls the migrant strings? Oh, that it were silent, that wings take on their own rapture, beating from the heart, a steady course to fly from the world of star glitter. Watching for Martha, I am sailing without anchor, without concern for my own wings, flying the ancient path like cranes, southern pull in the mountain sky, weaving the maze of constellations. In the air, she triangulates by towns on a jeweled highway. Grounded, I am guided by Orion and crowns of trees on a familiar horizon. Somewhere in the vault above, our eyes meet. She has become accustomed to night flight, sets her instruments for the moon. All winter, she feeds the little birds who dart from junipers to her cabin. On her plank porch, she studies silhouettes that flit through thunder, tarsi, mandibles, the winged approach within reach. She commits them to paper, dipping her brush in ink, drawing their worlds closer to her own. For berries, seeds, and alfalfa bees, she asks only a lesson in flight. Tonight, I watch the sky for Martha, free of all teachers but the stars.
Wow.
And Martha is my friend, and Martha lives about 10 miles from here, and she wanted to be a pilot. She was interrupted due to some health problems, but the time she was telling me about her excursion, she said, I'm going to be flying at night tonight. And so I was out there watching, is that her plane? And here came a plane, and it just became the connection.
Yeah. There's a nice, well, it's a poem of great love for her, and at the same time, love for her love of nature as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I love
She's
that.
an ornithologist, by the way. So
Okay.
that comes through. Great. Well, we're running out of time. I want to look at some of yours. I don't want this just all to be.
We have enough time. Don't worry.
I love your book, and I love the cover. And I wondered, do you know this artist who did the cover, or did you do the cover? I haven't even read.
No, I didn't do the cover. The artist is a painter in Moab. And she is she's just a fabulous painter, and I've been following her work for years. And then I humbly asked her if she would mind if that were on the cover of my book, because I thought it went really well with the water themes in the book, as well as the title poem. So she said yes. And so we've become friends now. So, yeah.
So what I love about the cover is that your poems are so rich in color and in senses, the sense of smell, which isn't in a lot of poetry that I read. You're very spices and herbs. I get so much, you just pop something into a poem just like that. And your colors are beautiful, whether you're, you name colors, you celebrate the colors. And I just think, I'm so glad your cover is as bright as what is contained in the book. It's a marvelous collection in so many ways. And I'm just focusing on those two things for this first question. So are you your wall is white in that room, but do you have other brightly painted rooms in your house? Are you a colorist?
No. In fact, we live in such a small house that I have yellow in the kitchen, very bright yellow, but the rest of the rooms are, well, there's blue, there's off-white, but for this room, it was dark red because the room that I'm in now was my son's room. And then I remodeled it during COVID, and I couldn't decide what to put, because I figured, well, I'm going to have a lot of paintings on the walls of friends, and maybe I'll put a couple of mine up. And
in your own.
I wanted the neutral color for this. So nope, I don't have a lot of tons of color, but.
Well, and that's the other way. You've chosen a calmer color for the background to highlight the brighter colors of your own paintings and other things. The poem Cilantro is one that I really like because it brings up a lot of the senses, and I just love the way it sounds. Would you read it for us? It's so nice.
Right here.
Okay. I hope so.
Okay. Cilantro. In my garden's abundant light, cilantro lifts its flickering scent of celery and mint. Such gentle green spines from tiny black seeds he once hid under my pillow in their elegant packet. When I part the row with my ankles, fronds open their eyes, their mouths. Garden of cilantro in the desert, radiant in their bed, menage a trois of the tomato, the onion, cilantro's carnal teeth of tranquility. And later, with leaves on the cutting board, I am dappled, sashaying to an otherworldly sea. I am the lemony pine on a starved tongue. When I mince them into the turquoise bowl, they tell the truth about jewels of asparagus, juices of blue stem grass, the mazes of our long love.
Oh, Nancy, that's so beautiful.
Thank you. I'm glad you like that poem, Margaret. That one started for me. Usually my poems start with either a scent or, something real. And so that started with a garden of cilantro. My God, well, not a garden of cilantro, but
It
the area
takes
of my
over.
garden, yes, where I planted cilantro, and I just decided to write a poem about it because I love the smell of it and the look of it, and it ended up being a love poem for my husband, which I never planned. So it just kind of found its way to be a love poem for Jan.
So I have to ask, I love cilantro. My husband hates it. So does Jan like it?
Oh, oh yeah. He was the one who introduced me to it because
Oh.
I'm a New Jersey girl, and when I grew up, no one used cilantro. I didn't even know what it was, and he did a lot of Mexican food cooking, and so when we first met, we started with cilantro. So maybe that's why it ended up being a poem for him with cilantro too, but it's not in the poem. But
Yeah, he widened your scope of herbs, and yes, yeah. I just love it. I'll read it again tonight to myself again. It's great to hear you read it. It's just beautiful to hear the poet read her own work. You can put your emotion into your lines. It's very sweet. So I want to move on to another poem I like, Star Root. And it's in your last section, which I love the title. It's called Notes to God from County Road H. And you talk about memory and coming to some peace, but people who have died, and yet you're working it out in this poem. I'm going to let the poem speak, and then we can talk about that afterward. Would you read Star Root? Do you say route or root?
Sure. And it's in the section Notes to God from County Road H, which are addressed to God of your choice. So it's you'll see where it comes in a couple of times. I'm always not getting the answers I sometimes want. And so I think that this poem addresses that. Sorry, I have allergies. Star route. I find a dead bear, whole, limp, hit by a car in the middle of the road home. It's a yearling, and its darkness makes me think of life when there were no stars. Tonight, the moon looks like a claw. Orion is blurred by a wisp, but I still try to trace his waist. I keep thinking I will vaporize into balance, breathe so well I am always in the present. My body will not let go of the other worlds I have lived through, in its unlit rooms of mauve, plum, periwinkle, or maybe an organ green with the life of decay. I am tired of how hunters bait bears with garbage, train dogs to tree them. The bears hunger like mine. Their snouts, a terrible miracle. Their bodies, a prize. My body will not let go of imagining the routines of those I know and love. Good friends, my niece, their days of paradise in a hand-blown glass pipe or nightly fifths, their prayers to you, their love of death, the hurt in the body center melting into all the mercurial colors of love. Where are the lost stars? Daughters and sons looking for sweetness. We have come through these waters, these stories, to this. After millions of years, we are ready to live in another galaxy. The Rochester panel, mazed with ancient petroglyphs off my windswept Utah highway, up a canyon jittered with upheavals. On the rock's red varnish, hundreds of figures are etched, opening their bodies to one another in sex and birth, surrounded by snakes, deer, goats, shields, and spears. The humans have big eyes and large heads. Maybe aliens, my friend joked. She went there in high school to breathe near this news, to be taken away by these lives persisting in stone for 1,000 years. They will always be a half mystery, except for the women looking up from childbirth to what lives behind the sky.
There are so many people in this poem, it seems, that you are mentioning or you're commemorating, yet you don't betray them with their actual stories, but I can hear somewhat of the story, where they are, where are they? And that's always the question of every time there's a death, where is that person? What does it mean to not be here? And what part still remains?
Mhm.
Fortunately, this poem is part of what remains. And
Well, the poem started for me with the bear. And because Jan and I actually did see a bear hit by a car that had been hit by a car dead on a drive that we were taking, coming home from somewhere at night. And it was such a shock to see such a beautiful animal lying there, so big. I mean, you say to yourself, how could this happen? I mean, but it actually happens quite often in Wisconsin, where we spend some time during the summers, that bears get hit on the road. And so the poem started with that image for me, and then I wasn't quite sure. Well, I mean, the the bears being baited with garbage, that idea of protection, I guess, that feeling of me wanting to protect animals who are so wonderful and yet so vulnerable,
Mhm.
who are encroaching, you know, technology and cars and guns and so forth. And somehow this self-destruction, I think, connected to the addiction that I mentioned in the poem about hand blown glass pipes and nightly fifths. That idea of we can so want to protect others, but then in the end, sometimes we're so we don't protect ourselves.
Mhm.
We're looking for something else during the sixth mass extinction.
And
that we're not sure what that spirituality is that we're looking for. And so we sometimes become very self-destructive. And so anyway, then it leads to the Petroglyph panel. And I wasn't quite sure how that came in or why that came in, because I don't like to analyze my own poems, but
the young woman needed to be there. Her story was tied there, right?
woman.
Was there a friend, a relative who
They
went?
didn't, they didn't, I guess, you could read it in a number of different ways, but in the poem, I hadn't intended that they died. They're just looking for something.
Okay.
So they're looking for something, and in this Petroglyph panel, I don't know if you've ever seen this one, Margaret, the Rochester panel, because there are so many images of fecundity in this, sexuality and giving birth, and also very alien looking people, and people going like this, looking up to the sky. And so somehow, I think it's a movement as a human race going forward, the poem maybe, and perhaps like with attention to our self-destruction at the same time. So as a human race, we go forward, but we're very self-destructive. But the primitive people who drew these were praising that idea of, connection through our bodies and giving. So
and continuing on,
and
so
continuing.
maybe hope.
Yes, sure. I think so. So this is one of those poems that just kind of, I don't know, came together in a very strange way. So
it covers a lot of ground. It's very, you're pulling from lots of sources. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Makes me think.
Thank you.
I see you, Salem. Do we have to stop? Can't let her read one more?
Yeah, you can absolutely, we're not in any big rush. Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to read one more. And yeah, if any folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box and we'll do the Q&A afterwards. But no, please, we're enjoying this. This has been a beautiful conversation so far. And yeah, I love hearing the poetry.
Thank you. For more time, I'd really like you to read Dearest Water. Nancy, would you read that? The title poem? That's just, you're such a storyteller, and I'd like to hear read it, and let's talk about it a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Dearest Water, in the searing heat of Dead Horse Point, looking over a vertical cliff, I walk near the corral where unwanted horses were once left to die. You have given us saliva and this rim of crimson and altar cloth of air, your distant promise. Seeing your green curve at the bottom of this canyon, they broke out and leapt to their deaths. My own thirst cruises like a lantern over hoodoos and dry tides. Your scent steams like a live secret. Water, my good memory. I am thirsty for the lost.
That is just gorgeous. Did you write it while you were out there?
No, the poem, you want to know how it started?
Sure.
I've been to Dead Horse Point a number of times, but I didn't write the poem while I was there. Someone sent me a postcard of, I think somebody did a series of postcards from different state parks and national parks. And so somebody sent me one from Dead Horse Point, and they weren't actually even there, but they wrote a postcard. And so I had it propped up on my desk for quite a while, and I loved the image of the kind of goosenecky river below. And then as I, after a time, I suddenly said, I remember there were several legends surrounding the horses, the wild horses who had been rounded up and had been placed at a dead end, basically overlooking a vertical cliff, very steep, but the river looked close to them. And one of the legends is that the horses were so thirsty that they broke out and leapt to their deaths, and they never reached the water. And that just broke my heart. And that's how the poem came to me. So it was years later, after I had actually visited the park, and it was prompted by a postcard.
Thank goodness the postcard came and we got the poem as a result. That's a powerful poem.
Thank you. Thanks.
Dearest Water. It's a beautiful book. You should be very proud of this. And you can buy it where? At Weller's.
Weller's. Yes. Thank you, Margaret. And I don't know if we're having any questions.
Yeah, does anybody who is on the Zoom right now want to pop in with a question? No pressure if not. I just want to open the option there. But I also just wanted to thank you both again. This has been such a warm and engaging conversation. And something I really admire about both of your work is just your sense of like observation. Like it's so beautiful to be able to see these things through your eyes. And that's one of my favorite things about poetry, is being able to experience those things, from a new perspective. When I think about lines like, brooch on the water god's chest, or cilantro's carnal teeth, like I've never heard those things described that way before, but I know exactly what you mean. And that takes a remarkable amount of skill. Your work is just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you.
And we've only got a couple of minutes left here. If we don't have any folks from the audience that would like to chime in, I'd like to just turn the time back over to you, Nancy and Margaret. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave folks with today?
Well, yes. Now that COVID is hopefully over and you feel more comfortable going out into the world, take your notebooks, because notebooks are great little things to be able to kind of pull out of your back pocket when you're in the grocery store and a poem comes to you. Or out in the desert, or maybe you're going to go to a restaurant or a library, places that you haven't been able to visit. Now you'll be able to kind of get some other ideas. It's hard to, I think, write in a vacuum. And I think that's why a lot of people have felt kind of closed in, writers have felt kind of closed in, not being able to get out. Sometimes you need a catalyst. You need to be able to react to something. So that's all I have to say, and happy writing.
Just remember, I think that there was some meaning that we could draw from the silence also that we experienced over the past 2 years in particular, that we don't want to just forget what we learned. Take that into account also, that peace and quiet is an important part of us as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Thank you both again so much for your time. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. I'll leave links where you can get these books. Today we talked about Backroads of Utah and the Temple of the Stars and Dearest Water. And yeah, just thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.